Today we're going to talk about the first indications of a real revolt forming against the Trump administration, and I've got 3 interviews with 5 senators this week after a trip to D.C. I sat down with Bernie Sanders to discuss Elon Musk's overreach and a new path forward for Democrats. I interview Elizabeth Warren about the attacks on the CFPB, and I'm joined by Cory Booker, Chris Murphy, and Brian Schatz to discuss the prospect of a constitutional crisis. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. It didn't even take a full month into Trump's second term, in a moment that would normally be his honeymoon period, before we're actually seeing some organized resistance to Trump. And I'm not talking about the usual resistance from liberals. I'm talking about the victims of his and Elon's efforts to clean house and purge the government of anybody who isn't deemed sufficiently loyal to MAGA. Trump has been firing inspectors general, prosecutors, civil servants, all in an act first, apologize later approach. Effectively, all of these employees can't legally be fired, but as far as Trump is concerned, fine. They'll bring wrongful termination suits and just go through a lengthy 1 to 2 year court process that virtually none of them have an appetite for or the resources for. And in the meantime, he still accomplishes his goal of remaking the federal government in his mold, which is to say, filled with loyalists and sycophants whose loyalty will be not to the Constitution, but rather just to Donald Trump. And the reality is that much of his ability to convey this sense of absolute power relies on our collective acceptance of it, which is why it was particularly bad news for Trump when that bubble was pierced by high-ranking U.S. attorneys. First, there was Republican Danielle Sassoon, and then there was Republican Hagan Scotton, both taking public stance against the administration when they were ordered by Trump's mega-corrupt acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove to dismiss the charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Now, Trump wanted the charges dismissed against Adams because he knew that if he could grant Adams his freedom, then Adams would be a willing partner in Trump's efforts to allow ICE carte blanche into New York City for its mass deportation efforts. This is a true quid pro quo if you have ever seen one. Adams exchanges his freedom for Trump's political agenda. But the bribery charges that Adams incurred were legit and well-founded, and the prosecutors who worked on his case weren't willing to just let these charges go because Trump found him useful, found him convenient. And so they very publicly resigned, planting the seeds of a broader movement against Trump, from the inside of his own administration, from members of his own party. Now, I'm sure you've heard the famous line from Scotton's resignation letter, "I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me." I want to reiterate, these U.S. attorneys are no liberals. These guys aren't out there organizing BLM protests, right? Sassoon clerked for Antonin Scalia, is a member of the Federalist Society, and was handpicked by Trump to lead that office. And Scotton is a veteran, a 2-time Bronze Star recipient, a former law clerk for Brett Kavanaugh, and then Supreme Court Justice John Roberts. For these people to take such public stands against Trump's administration matters. Non-compliance matters. Refusal to obey in advance matters. It is precisely the people who don't speak out who actually give Trump this sense of impunity that he thrives off of. His power, again, is derived from the perception that he can quash all dissent. But he's not quashing dissent. He is inciting it. He's engendering it right now. And that dissent is growing, and it's public. And it's coming not just from Democrats, but lifelong Republicans. There will come a point where he'll make too many enemies across the entire political spectrum. And we're not there yet, but the seeds are planted. Trump thought that he would show up with full power, total power in Washington. It hasn't even been a month, and already the cracks are showing. Coming up next are previews of my interviews with Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Chris Murphy, and Brian Schatz. But first, just a quick note, this is my once-weekly video podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It is identical to my once-weekly audio podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. On just this one video per week, there are sponsors. So here's a quick word from some sponsors, and then previews of my interviews with Senators Murphy, Schatz, Warren, Sanders, and Booker. No Lie is brought to you by the Merchants Payments Coalition. Credit card companies are ripping you off, and you don't even know it. Every time you use a credit card, they charge a hidden swipe fee, which costs an average family more than $1,100 per year. Credit card companies and their Wall Street banking partners raked in a record $172 billion on those fees in 2023. $172 billion with a B. Americans are paying the highest swipe fees in the world, and with no competition, swipe fees have nowhere to go but up. But the good news is the House and Senate have a bipartisan bill to fix this problem. It's called the Credit Card Competition Act. The Credit Card Competition Act would make credit card companies and their Wall Street partners compete like every business is supposed to. It would save you, your family, everyone who swipes a credit card hundreds or even thousands each year. Call your senators and representatives, tell them to pass the Credit Card Competition Act. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. So we hear a lot about red flags, but let's talk about green flags. If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify green flags, actively practice them in your relationships, and embody the green flag energy yourself. Honestly, there's not a lot we can control about the world these days, but this is something we can control, so we should take advantage. And look, as far as therapy goes, I say all the time how much of an advocate I am. A lot of my friends do it, my family, even me. The stigma surrounding it is gone, and so why not invest in yourself and your mental health? You can be a little selfless this year and finally take care of you. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving over 5 million people worldwide. You'll get access to a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties, and you can easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nolie to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nolie. We've seen Trump deploy this strategy before. He did it in 2016, where he came into office on the back of promises that he would make a healthcare plan that was more comprehensive and more affordable, of a jobs boom that never materialized, a manufacturing renaissance that never materialized, of an infrastructure plan that never materialized, and now he's doing the same thing here. And so how do you square that gap, square that circle, basically, where you have him saying one thing, consistently failing to deliver, and yet the message doesn't seem to get through?
It's just not just failure to deliver. He lies all the time, and this is a whole other problem. And Trump has, I'm not going to say the politicians throughout the ages haven't lied. People lie, but he has taken it to an entirely new level. And part of their strategy is just to lie and lie and lie. You go after USAID, you come up with some crazy, outrageous lies to justify what you're doing.
Right, like they're sending $50 million worth of condoms to Gaza.
Completely. These guys, and Musk amplifies that on Twitter, etc. I think what we have got to do, which the Democratic Party is at the moment incapable of doing, is organizing at the grassroots level. And I'm going to be going around the country trying to do that, trying to get working people and young people, people of color, just the majority of the people to stand up and say, you know what? When 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, when 85 million people have no health insurance, you do not need to give tax breaks to billionaires and cut programs that working families desperately need. Let's focus on the needs of workers. What do we need to do? We need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. You think Trump and the Republicans are going to do that? Ain't going to do that. We need to make it easier for workers to join unions. You think Trump and the Republicans are going to do that? No, they've actually neutered the National Labor Relations Board, which will make it harder for workers to get their union victory certified. Do you think Trump is going to do anything real about lowering the cost of prescription drugs? I doubt it very much. So what we have got to do is focus on the needs of working people. What are they? Healthcare system is broken. Childcare system is broken. Housing crisis of enormous consequence. Climate change is threatening the entire planet. And we can create a whole lot of jobs moving to sustainable energy. Stay focused on what is important to working people. Expose the hypocrisy of Trump. I think that's kind of what we got to do.
Elon has come out and said that he wants the funding for the rest of the year, roughly $710 million for the rest of 2025's funding, for that to be rescinded as a way to kind of starve the agency of the funding it needs to keep operating. Obviously, the purse strings are controlled by Congress, even though we've seen Republicans contract all of their autonomy over to the executive branch. But where do we stand right now in terms of his ability, or the Trump administration's ability, to be able to legally starve funding of the agency and kind of kill it that way?
So let's do a little good news, right? I know right now we're having to do a lot of bad news. One of the pieces of good news is actually the agency has a surplus right now. So it's got some gas in the tank to keep running. But the second part of this is that we built this agency, like all of the banking regulators, outside the reach of congressional funding. Again, it's all in the law. If we can get the courts to enforce the law, the agency will have the money it needs.
How do you guys think about dealing with this idea of conferring goodwill onto the Republican Party in an era where we see, for example, that when Democrats had control during the CARES Act, right? This was before Joe Biden took office. In the CARES Act, all Democrats voted for the CARES Act, even though doing so would give a political win, to Donald Trump. Joe Biden takes office, tries to pass the American Rescue Plan, does so only with Democratic votes. I'm not sure if he had a couple of Republican votes, but in any case, there was no reciprocation there. And we see that over and over, where when Democrats have control, they'll make concessions to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bipartisan gun safety law. They will name the bills in such a way that people know it was a bipartisan venture to give some credit to Republicans. Turn around and we see a situation where, Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court, for example. We have a new rule: no appointments to the Supreme Court in an election year, except for Amy Coney Barrett when votes are quite literally being cast. And so there is a recurring theme where goodwill is conferred onto the right that isn't reciprocated onto the left. And so has that impacted how you're thinking of working with the Republicans? And I know that that means that we enter into an era of even more acrimony and less compromise and more dysfunction within the government. But does the fact that there is that asymmetry and that goodwill isn't reciprocated, does that make you think differently if we're in a position where we regain the majority, that's going to be offered up?
Well, I'm not going to permanently give up on the idea that we can find bipartisan compromise. I mean, you pointed out the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act as maybe a moment of democratic weakness, that we cooperated with Republicans. Well, yeah, we passed a bill that wasn't ideal. It wasn't everything that we wanted, but since we passed that bill with some Republicans supporting it, murders have gone down in this country by 20%. That was a good thing. The question is, can you work with Republicans in the middle of a constitutional crisis when democracy is on the line? And right now, I think that this crisis is serious and deepening in its seriousness, that our job, number one, number two, and number three, is to save our democracy. And so that means, for me, when it comes to nominees, there might be one or two of these nominees that on their face are kind of mainstream conservative thinkers, but I'm not going to support somebody that's going to implement a blatantly illegal policy like withholding federal funds from not-for-profits in my state that are legally due the money that Congress authorized. So no, I don't think that we should give up on the idea that once this constitutional crisis is solved, either inside Congress or from pressure outside of Congress, that we can get some things done together. But right now, the focus has to be on protecting our democracy and protecting the wholesale theft of our government by this billionaire class.
And of course, to watch the full interviews, click the thumbnails right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link on the screen to listen to the audio version of this episode. And of course, to see more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.